The sun had just begun its descent beyond the hills, when the Roman countryside took on that golden glow that seemed to slow time itself. It was that hour when shadows grew long. The earth exhaled its warmth, and even the most bustling parts of the empire seemed to ease into a gentler rhythm. In a small villa nestled among vineyards and olive groves just outside the town of Florentia, the day's labor was winding down. Elia, the matron of the house, moved slowly across the stone-paved courtyard, her sandals soft against the earth-warmed ground. Her linen stola, once bright white but now comfortably worn, fluttered gently in the evening breeze. She held a woven basket on her arm filled with figs, herbs, and a small folded cloth that had carried the bread she fetched earlier from the outdoor oven near the bathhouse. The smell of rosemary and thyme clung to her fingers, and above her, doves cooed from the rooftop beams inside the villa. The day's heat still lingered on the brick walls and terracotta floors. Light filtered through woven shutters, bathing the atrium in soft gold. The central impluvium, the shallow pool designed to catch rainwater, mirrored the sky's changing hues, its surface motionless except for the occasional drop falling from a fig leaf overhead. Elia paused beside it, dipping her fingers into the cool water before continuing through the corridor. Toward the back garden, her husband, Gaius, sat beneath the arbor, where grapevines cast dappled shadows across the wooden table. His tunic was modest, dyed a deep ochre, and his sandals were dusty from the walk back from town. A scroll rested in his lap, though he wasn't reading. He looked up as Elia approached, a soft smile crossing his face, not one of excitement, but of quiet contentment, the kind worn smooth by years of familiarity and unspoken affection. Without words, Elia set the basket on the table, took the cloth inside, and returned with 2 ceramic cups and a flask of watered wine. She poured, slowly, the liquid catching the golden light as it filled the cups. The only sounds were the distant bleat of a goat, the rustle of vine leaves, and the faint rhythm of sandals on gravel as their son, Lucius, returned from the nearby workshop where he learned his craft under an old mosaic artist. Lucius was still young, barely 14, but the dust on his tunic and the flecks of colored stone clinging to his hands told the story of a full day's learning. He greeted his parents with a respectful nod before sitting quietly on a nearby stool. Reaching for a fig from the basket, his movements were slow, deliberate, like someone easing themselves from one world into another, from the discipline of his tutor to the gentle rhythm of home. Dinner was not elaborate. Elia laid out olives cured with lemon, a plate of cheese wrapped in fig leaves, and a simple lentil stew that had simmered for hours over the hearth. No words passed between them for several moments, and none were needed. In this part of the empire, with the wars far off and the harvest near, peace was not a luxury. It was the air they breathed. As they ate, the light faded further. Gaius spoke of the market, of a new shipment of glass from the east, of rumors, of a new aqueduct to be built in the southern hills. His voice was measured, calm, almost like the cadence of a priest in prayer. Lucius listened, occasionally asking questions, his tone soft, curious but never hurried. Elia spoke less, preferring to observe the changing shape of her son's face, the faint lines deepening at the corners of her husband's eyes, the way the vines had begun to turn ever so slightly with the season's change. After the meal, the family moved into the peristyle garden, a quiet square surrounded by columns, filled with lavender, laurel, and small marble statues half covered in moss. Elia lit a few small oil lamps, placing them along the garden walls. Their soft glow added warmth to the twilight, casting gentle halos over the plants and onto the sandals lying neatly near the threshold. Lucius lay on the bench near the laurel, looking upward. The first stars began to appear, and he pointed to one. That one always comes first, he said, not asking, just sharing. Gaius nodded. That's because it never forgets its place. Elia chuckled softly and adjusted the boy's tunic where it had twisted. Stars are more dependable than men, sometimes. Their laughter was light, nearly silent, like the hum of a lullaby. And so the evening deepened, not into excitement, not into grandeur, but into a quietness so full that it seemed to cradle the world. The Roman villa, though just one among thousands across the empire, felt infinite in that moment, timeless, still. A place where the day could end without demand, where hearts could rest without guard. The oil lamps flickered in the soft wind, their light dancing against the old stone. The scent of lavender rose with the night, and the gentle sounds of crickets began their lullaby beyond the garden wall. And in the heart of the empire, under a sky full of ancient stars, life moved slowly, steadily, one breath at a time. The night deepened gently over the countryside, as though it were laying a silk blanket across the land. Inside the villa, the air had cooled, and the warm stone walls now offered comfort rather than heat. Elia moved through the house with quiet steps, collecting the last of the oil lamps, trimming their wicks, and shielding the flames with clay covers to dim their glow. She paused at each doorway, listening to the silence that followed the day, not empty, but full of stillness. Lucius had already gone to his chamber. His cot was simple, carved from cypress wood with a thick woolen blanket folded at the foot. On a shelf nearby, his small collection of treasures rested: a smooth pebble from the Tiber, a broken bronze coin, a figurine of Mercury carved from olive wood. Each item held a memory, not of great importance, but of quiet moments that mattered to him alone. He lay on his side, eyes open, watching the flicker of lamplight dance across the ceiling beams. In the silence, he imagined the mosaics he'd helped piece together that morning: soft blue tiles for the sea, pale amber for the sand. His teacher had praised his careful eye. It had made Lucius smile, not because he craved approval, but because the compliment felt like something real, something earned slowly. Down the corridor, Elia stepped into the tablinum, the small study that Gaius kept for his records and scrolls. A few wax tablets were stacked neatly on the desk, beside a stylus and a half-finished letter. She didn't read them. She merely adjusted the lamp slightly, then turned to look out the open shutter. The night outside was still and silver, and a faint breeze carried the soft scent of crushed mint from the garden path below. Gaius remained in the peristyle. He had not moved from his place since dinner, but he wasn't sleeping. His eyes traced the sky, star to star, each one a familiar anchor. The empire stretched wide, he knew, beyond the mountains, beyond the rivers, across deserts and seas. But here, under this sky, in this garden, the world felt close and whole. Eventually, he rose and made his way back into the atrium. The faint sound of dripping water echoed from the impluvium, and he paused beside it, cupping some in his hand to splash across his face. It was cold and sharp, enough to draw him back into the moment, not with urgency, but with quiet clarity. He entered the sleeping chamber where Elia had already laid out the simple cotton covers. Their bed was low and firm, its frame polished. Smooth over years, on the small table beside it, a single lamp flickered. Elia was brushing her hair with slow, even strokes, a nightly ritual that neither of them rushed. Without needing to speak, Gaius took his place beside her. They said little before sleep. Their words during the day had been enough. And so, with the lamp extinguished and the shutters gently pulled closed, the villa settled deeper into stillness. Outside, the stars held their places. Crickets hummed. A breeze moved through the vineyard rows, rustling the grape leaves just enough to remind the night it was a live dot, and in the quiet heart of the empire. The family slept, not out of exhaustion, but out of trust. Trust in the stillness, trust in the rhythm, trust in the peace that they had shaped, like potters at the wheel of time at the first edge of dawn. When night still held its grip, but the promise of day whispered at the horizon, a low knock echoed. On the villa's main gate. It was not loud, not urgent, just firm enough to wake the house with a whisper. Gaius stirred first. He sat up, listening. Another knock, then stillness. Elia sat beside him, rubbing her eyes. He lit a lamp and wrapped a woolen tunic around his shoulders, then made his way quietly through the atrium. The impluvium reflected the soft flame as he passed. Outside, the sky was gray-blue, that short, uncertain are between night and morning. At the gate, a familiar figure waited. It was Cassianus, the old friend who lived half a day's journey away in the northern hills. He carried a satchel, wore a travel-worn cloak, and held his shoulders with the stiffness of a man who had slept upright more than once along the road. Gaius opened the gate and smiled softly. "Come in. "You've arrived before the sun." Cassianus returned the smile, faint but warm. The road was kind, and I walked slow. Inside, Elia brought warm water and a cup of honeyed barley tea. No one asked questions. The questions would come later, after bread, after rest. For now, the arrival of a guest was enough. Cassianus set down his satchel and removed his small, wrapped parcel. He placed it on the table carefully, without explanation. Gaius didn't ask. Some things, like friendships, didn't need explanations in the early hours. Lucius appeared a few moments later, rubbing his eyes and surprised to find a guest. He bowed his head politely, and Cassianus nodded back, quietly acknowledging how much the boy had grown. They sat together for a while, 3 generations of quiet souls, listening to the water from the fountain outside, and the first morning bird beginning its song. In that moment, there was no empire, no politics, no news from Rome, only people and a sky, and time gently unfolding. Morning light spilled slowly across the courtyard stones, brushing the walls with pale gold. The dew that had gathered overnight shimmered in delicate beads on the leaves of the laurel and the tips of the vineyard vines. In the kitchen, Elia moved quietly, stirring a pot of barley and crushed dates, letting the warmth rise and fill the villa with a gentle, sweet aroma. Cassianus sat at the stone table in the peristyle, his shoulders draped in a soft woolen shawl borrowed from the house. His face, lined and weathered from years of travel, held the look of someone who had not rushed in a long time and had no intention to now. A cup of tea steamed gently in front of him, untouched, as he watched the first sunlight touch the edges of the villa roof. Lucius brought a wooden tray from the kitchen, bread still warm, olives, a small bowl of soft cheese drizzled with oil. He placed it with care, and Cassianus nodded his thanks without words. Gaius joined them moments later, seating himself with the calm of a man who knew the value of slow beginnings. They ate quietly, the kind of quiet that comes not from absence, but from comfort, where every small sound is enough. The clink of ceramic cups, the crunch of crust, the distant echo of hooves on stone from the village road. After the meal, Elia returned to the herb garden, trimming thyme and rosemary, her hands moving through the green like a familiar hymn. Gaius and Cassianus walked along the southern edge of the estate, where fig trees bordered the lower vineyard. Their conversation was light, not filled with news, but with memories. They spoke of old teachers, of the last summer festival, of a mosaic Cassianus had seen in a temple far to the east, where the sea and stars had been laid in blue and silver stone. Lucius followed them at a distance, occasionally stopping to examine a broken vine or pick up a fallen fig. He liked listening to adults talk like this, not about chores or lessons, but about things that stretched farther than the villa walls. Later, as the day warmed, the family gathered under the large olive tree near the bathhouse where the shade was thick and cool. Elia brought out clay jars of cool water and a plate of sliced melon. The sun filtered through the leaves, casting flickering patterns on their arms and faces, and the air was filled with the scent of warm stone and ripening fruit. Cassianus unwrapped the parcel he had brought. Inside was a small ceramic oil lamp, shaped like a shell, with intricate lines etched around the edges. He held it in his palms before placing it on the table between them. "It was made by a potter in the southern provinces," he said, his voice slow and low, "an old man who no longer sells in markets. He only makes them for the people he remembers." Gaius ran his fingers along the edge. "It's beautiful. The lines look like waves. They are." He said, "The lamp is meant to remind us that every night has its own tide." Lucius leaned closer, fascinated. "Does it float?" Cassianus smiled faintly, only in memory. They all sat for a while, watching the way the sunlight slipped across the lamp's surface. It was not large, not precious in the way cities measure such things, but it was meaningful, heavy with the kind of weight that only quiet craftsmanship can carry. As the afternoon grew warm and still, they retreated inside. Gaius and Cassianus reclined in the study, where the shutters were drawn and the coolness held. Lucius returned to his small workbench near the eastern wall. He pulled out a slab of soft clay and began shaping a new figure, slowly, with no rush, letting the feel of the material guide him. His fingers pressed gently into the clay, coaxing a shape that might one day be a horse or a leaf or just a curve that felt good to make. He wasn't sure yet, and that was fine. Damon's lessons still echoed in his head from a story once told, that clay remembers motion and softness and care. Outside, Elia began setting the table again. Evening was not far. The villa had made its long circle, from night to day, and now moving softly toward night once more. Evening returned with gentle footsteps, its light pouring like warm honey across the terracotta rooftops and turning the vineyard rows into golden ribbons. The shadows of the olive trees stretched longer across the garden path, and the villa's stone walls radiated the heat they had absorbed throughout the day, releasing it slowly as if breathing it back into the air. Inside the villa, the sounds of the day softened, no longer the gentle clatter of plates or the low murmur of conversation, but quieter now, more distant. Lucius, still at his bench, had finished shaping the small clay form, a curled leaf. Delicate in its lines, the edge slightly lifted as if caught in an invisible breeze. He placed it carefully on the drying shelf beside his other works, each one a small milestone in a quiet apprenticeship. He stood and stretched, the late sun touching his hair as he crossed the corridor toward the atrium. There, the impluvium held the sky again, this time glowing with the soft reflection of a sky painted in apricot and dusty rose. A few birds skimmed over the open roof, their wings catching the last light before settling into the trees beyond. Gaius and Cassianus were seated beneath the arbor once more, the same place they had gathered the previous evening, as if time had folded back in on itself. Their conversation had drifted into silence, not out of awkwardness, but comfort. Cassianus sipped slowly from a cup of watered wine, his eyes watching the vines sway in the breeze. Gaius leaned back, one foot resting on the low stool, his hand idly tracing a crack in the wooden table he had repaired many years ago. Elia arrived with a tray, soft bread, goat cheese blended with herbs, and figs halved and drizzled with honey. She placed it between them, brushing a curl of hair from her forehead, and then sat as well. They ate slowly, in no rush, the food merely part of the moment, not the center of it. Lucius joined soon after, taking his place and offering a small smile to Cassianus, who nodded gently and pointed to the basket beside him. "For you," he said simply. Lucius opened it to find a small pouch of colored tesserae, mosaic stones in shades of turquoise, amber, and deep red. The boy's eyes lit up. "These are beautiful." Cassianus chuckled softly. "They're leftovers from a bathhouse floor in the eastern provinces. I thought you might find them useful." Lucius turned the stones over in his hands, each one cool and smooth. They caught the fading light like tiny jewels, and in his mind he already saw patterns taking shape, waves, maybe, or a border of flame. He looked up and said only, "Thank you." Dinner lingered into dusk. The sky darkened, gradually, not with suddenness, but with grace, as if dimming the lights in a theater, drawing the curtain on another act. The scent of herbs from Elia's garden drifted into the peristyle, basil, sage, lavender warmed by the sun. After the meal, Elia lit the courtyard lamps. She moved from one to the next, with practiced hands, each small flame flaring to life and then settling into a gentle glow. The flicker of lamplight reflected in the impluvium again, where the stars were beginning to take their places in the pool's calm surface. Cassianus spoke, his voice low and steady. "Do you ever wonder if Rome will look like this 1,000 years from now?" Gaius looked at the sky before answering. "I wonder, but even if it doesn't, someone will be sitting under stars, drinking wine, speaking slowly," Lucius added, "and making things with their hands." They all smiled. Later, as the night wrapped itself fully round the villa, they prepared for rest. Cassianus was given a guest cot in the study, a thick woolen blanket and a linen pillow. He bowed his thanks, and Gaius placed a small oil lamp, the shell-shaped one, beside him. In Lucius's room, the boy placed the pouch of tesserae on his shelf, right beside his clay leaf and the old wooden figurine. He lay down, the cool pillow beneath his cheek, and listened to the soft night sounds, the distant croak of frogs, the chirp of insects, and the breath of wind brushing against shutters. Elia stood at the atrium one last time before bed. The moon hung low, caught in the edges of the impluvium, its reflection trembling ever so slightly with each ripple of the water. She touched the stone ring gently, her fingers absorbing the day's last coolness. Then, like a closing flower, the villa folded into sleep. And across the quiet countryside, where other homes glowed dimly in the dark and fields slept under the silver of the moon, the Roman Empire rested, not in triumph or spectacle, but in peace, in stillness, in the slow journey of ordinary lives lived fully and gently. Morning came not with a clamor, but with the hush of light filtering gently through woven shutters. Birds announced the dawn with measured songs, and the sky, once wrapped in the silver hush of night, was now painted in the pale blues and pinks of early Roman daybreak. Inside the villa, the warmth of sleep still clung to the air like the fading scent of lavender left on pillows. Lucius awoke first. His body had adjusted to the villa's rhythm, the slow, intentional cadence of country life. He sat up on his cot, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. Outside his small window, the courtyard was awash in soft light, the fig tree casting a pattern of lacework across the tiled floor. He dressed quietly and stepped into the corridor, where his sandals tapped softly against the stone. The air still carried the coolness of night, and dew shimmered faintly along the ivy climbing the columns. He made his way toward the kitchen, where Elia was already stirring a pot above the hearth. The smell of simmering lentils and barley mingled with crushed herbs, thyme and a hint of garlic, made the space feel more alive than awake. "Morning, my heart," she whispered, handing him a small clay cup of warm honeyed water. He took it with both hands, sipping slowly. She didn't speak more. There was no need to fill the morning with talk. They knew each other's rhythms the way the garden knew the sun. In the peristyle, Cassianus was seated again beneath the arbor, this time sharpening a reed pen with careful hands. Gaius joined him with a scroll tucked under his arm, unrolling it halfway before letting it rest on the table. It was a list, not of debts, nor taxes, nor shipments, but a catalog of the villa's trees. He was marking which fig had begun to fruit earliest, which olive branches needed cutting back, and which vine rows required rest next season. Lucius approached and watched silently for a moment. He admired how his father treated such simple tasks. With reverence, no task was rushed. Every leaf was considered, every tree remembered. "Would you like to mark the next row?" Gaius asked, gesturing toward the scroll. Lucius nodded and took the pen from Cassianus, dipping it into the inkpot before carefully scratching the symbol for the northern vine row. His letters still a little uneven, but full of focus. The scroll was rolled up again, and Gaius stood. "Let's walk the field," he said. Together, father and son passed through the outer gate, following the gravel path lined with small clay markers. The vineyard stretched out before them, and beyond it, the rolling hills and pastures that fed the villa's peace. Gaius picked a leaf here, examined a branch there, offering small murmurs of approval or thought as they went. Lucius asked about pruning, about the slope of the soil, and Gaius answered each question not as a lecture, but as a gift. At the villa, Elia and Cassianus shared a morning meal of simple cakes made from spelt flour and sweetened with raisins. They ate under the arbor, speaking softly of family, of children grown and married, of siblings long past. Cassianus told a story of a street performer in Alexandria who could balance on one hand atop a spinning amphora, and Elia laughed, a warm, rolling sound that echoed through the peristyle like wind chimes on a breezy afternoon. Later that morning, a neighbor arrived. Septima, a widow who lived 2 villas away, brought with her a basket of fresh herbs and a small loaf of barley bread, still warm. Elia welcomed her in, offering fruit in return. Their exchange was quiet and kind, words of weather, of goats that wandered too far, of the early arrival of swallows in the orchard. They sat together for a time in the garden, Septima's voice blending with Elia's like old music, their words rising and falling with ease. Lucius returned mid-morning, holding a handful of wildflowers he had picked on the way back. He placed them in a simple vase and set them on the table without ceremony. In the afternoon, when the sun reached its peak and shadows shortened, the villa grew still again. Lucius sat beside his shelf of clay works and reached for a lump he had left the night before. The beginnings of a lamp in the shape of a fish, His fingers moved slowly, shaping the body, etching the scales with a sharpened twig, smoothing the tail with a curved pebble. The act itself was enough, not the result, just the motion, the rhythm. Outside, Cassianus was resting on a long bench beneath the olive tree. His eyes were closed, his hands folded over his chest, and though he was not asleep, his breathing matched the softness of the breeze that passed through the garden. Gaius walked the outer perimeter of the vineyard once more, pausing at each gate, each fence post, each worn stone that had stood for decades. His hand ran over the rough surface of one such post, fingers catching on a nick he remembered placing there as a boy, long before the villa had passed into his care. In these hours, when the empire was awake in its cities, counting coins, marching, troops debating in marble halls, this villa remained in a different world, a world of patience, of stewardship, of stories passed through gestures, and love marked not by declarations, but by presence. Evening would come again soon, but no one rushed to meet it. It would arrive as it always had, on time, unannounced, welcomed like an old friend. And in this stillness, this peace without pomp, the Roman Empire lived not in its emperors, nor its legions, but in its homes, its gardens, and its slow, quiet hours. The sun began its slow descent beyond the hills, its light bending low over the tiled rooftops and long vineyard rows. Shadows stretched once more across the villa's courtyard, and the day exhaled its final warmth into the stone walls. There was a softness to the air now, that perfect in-between moment when the light turned golden, and time itself seemed to pause. Inside the kitchen, Elia was mixing flour and water, her hands moving rhythmically over the wooden table. She added a pinch of salt, a drizzle of oil, and pressed the dough down gently, folding it inward again and again. The scent of baking bread soon joined the air, warm, earthy, comforting. Cassianus had returned to the arbor, where he carefully whittled a small piece of olive wood. His blade moved in short, practiced strokes, shaping a slender handle for a spoon. The wood was old, gnarled, and twisted from years of sun, but beneath the surface was smooth grain waiting to be revealed. Each shaving curled away and fell, softly, to the ground like dry petals. Lucius, watching nearby, was slowly copying a sketch from one of Gaius's scrolls, a diagram of the villa's rainwater system. His stylus moved carefully over a wax tablet, copying the lines of gutters and channels, the way the impluvium collected water into the cistern below. He paused often, not out of confusion, but to understand, to imagine the water flowing through stone, through time. Gaius himself was in the storeroom, inventorying amphorae. He marked each one with a dab of red pigment, olive oil, honey, garum. He ran his hand over the clay surface of one particularly old jar, its glaze chipped, its seal long worn. It had belonged to his grandfather. He remembered that man's hands, large and firm, lifting the same vessel in another time. Here, in this quiet task, the past was alive again. In the far corner of the villa, the lamp maker arrived. He was an old man, quiet, stooped, and known in the village simply as Linus. He came not to sell, but to deliver a promised gift. Elia met him at the gate, and he bowed his head slightly, placing a small wrapped bundle into her hands. She unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a lamp shaped like a grape leaf, its center hollowed for the wick, its edges veined with delicate lines, a symbol of peace, of vines, of this place. It holds the night without fear, Linus said. She thanked him, offering a small clay pot of preserved olives in return, which he accepted with a gentle smile. They did not speak much more, only enough. He departed as quietly as he came, disappearing down the path where fireflies had begun to blink to life. As twilight settled fully over the land, the family gathered again in the peristyle. Elia lit the grape leaf lamp, placing it in the center of the table. The warm flame danced softly, illuminating their faces one by one. The bread was sliced. Cheese was served with herbs and olives. A simple meal, a perfect one. Lucius told a story he had heard from a passing soldier, of a horse that had learned to count by stamping its hoof. Cassianus countered with a tale of a cat that stole dried fish from a merchant's stall each morning. At the same hour, they laughed, not loudly, not wildly, but with warmth that lingered in the cool evening air. After dinner, Lucius helped Gaius fold the chairs and carry the vessels back to the kitchen. His arms were still small, but his movements had grown sure. Gaius ruffled his hair gently. "You'll tend this place someday," he said softly. Lucius nodded, not in eagerness or resistance, but in quiet understanding. It was a promise not of duty, but of love. In the bathing room, Elia poured warm water into a shallow basin. She dipped a cloth and pressed it gently against her face, wiping away the dust of the day. The herbs she had steeped earlier, lavender and marjoram, filled the air with calm. She exhaled slowly. Another day done. Another day whole. Cassianus sat by the window of his guest room, looking out toward the road. Far in the distance, the lights of another villa blinked between trees. The world felt wide and close at once. He took out a small piece of parchment and began to write, not a letter, not a record, but a memory. A line or two to capture the shape of the day, so that even if time carried him far, the peace of this place would remain with him. Lucius lay in his bed again, the clay leaf on his shelf now dry and firm. He stared at it in the glow of the oil lamp, his mind calm and full of slow, pleasant thoughts of lamp makers and vine leaves and old friends who carved spoons under olive trees. His eyes grew heavy and the world around him softened, and beyond his window, beneath a sky embroidered with stars, the Roman villa slept not from weariness, but from fullness, from a day lived not in haste nor glory, but in the sacred rhythm of ordinary life. The soft hush of early dawn returned once more to the villa, unhurried and gentle. The sky blooming slowly from deep charcoal to faded blue. There was a hush to everything, the stones, the trees, even the birds waited a little longer before beginning their song. Inside his room, Lucius stirred beneath the light linen blanket. He didn't open his eyes at first. Instead, he listened to the whisper of the wind brushing against shutters, to the faint creak of a tree outside, to the far-off rustle of a broom against the courtyard tiles. All these sounds were as familiar to him as his own heartbeat. When he did rise, it was with no rush. He stood, stretched his arms, and crossed the room barefoot, pausing to touch the clay leaf he had made, now dry, solid, and proud on his shelf. He smiled faintly and made his way into the corridor, where cool air wrapped around his ankles and the scent of morning herbs drifted softly from the kitchen. Elia was there, as always, the keeper of mornings. She moved with the practiced quiet of someone who had risen early her whole life. A pot of grain simmered above the small hearth, and a jar of preserved figs stood open nearby, its rich aroma perfuming the space. She nodded to Lucius without speaking, handing him a warm piece of flatbread as he sat. Together they shared a silent meal, a ritual more meaningful than words. Outside, the world was still gathering itself. In the study, Gaius was unfurling a scroll, not for business, but for curiosity. It was a treatise on celestial movements, copied decades ago by a friend in the city. The ink had faded in places, and the edges were frayed, but the diagrams of stars and orbits remained intact. He traced the curve of Saturn's path with a fingertip, marveling at the quiet logic of the heavens. Cassianus entered not long after, now clean-shaven. His travel cloak hung near the doorway to air. He sat beside Gaius with a slight groan, the groan of a man no longer young, but still thankful to rise each day. "You're studying the stars again," he said gently. "They're one of the few things that never change," Gaius replied, smiling. Lucius came to join them, and Gaius showed him the scroll. He explained how sailors used the stars to find their way across black seas, how farmers timed their planting with the rising of specific constellations, and how in the city of Rome itself, the calendar lived in stone and sky. Lucius listened wide-eyed, running his finger over the spiral of a constellation drawn with dotted lines. "Do the stars ever fall?" he asked. Cassianus answered this time, "Only when they wish to be noticed." Later that morning, the family walked through the upper orchard, where the almond trees were beginning to bud. The air here was different, a little cooler, touched with mountain breezes. Elia pointed to a branch that needed tying back, and Lucius climbed the low wall to reach it. He knotted the twine with care, just as Gaius had taught him. Along the path, They came upon a group of field workers returning from the lower terraces, strong, sun-darkened men and women, their baskets filled with herbs and soil-stained root vegetables. Elia offered them cool water, and they exchanged a few words about the health of the vines. The weather, a wild dog seen near the grain shed, all said in the quiet, practical tone of those whose hands told the truth better than words. The day wore on slowly, measured by small tasks and long pauses. In the garden, Elia trimmed rosemary for drying. Lucius washed clay cups with rainwater. Enjoying the cool splash, Cassianus helped Gaius check the hinges of the villa's main gate, rubbing a bit of oil into the iron to keep it moving smoothly. Even the olive trees seemed to sway in agreement. Everything done with care, nothing done in haste. As afternoon melted into evening, the villa became quiet again. A hush fell, the kind that made even the wind slow down. Elia lit the grape leaf lamp just as she had the evening before, and Lucius watched the flame curl upward like a small spirit waking up. They gathered once more beneath the arbor, a bowl of lentils at the center of the table, a plate of cheese, figs, and thin slices of salted fish. "I had a dream," Lucius said between bites. "I was walking through a city made of silver. The streets glowed like moonlight, and everyone moved slowly, like they were underwater." Cassianus leaned in. "And were you alone?" "No," the boy replied. "You were all there, but different, like from a story." Gaius nodded. "Sometimes dreams are just memories we haven't lived yet." They sat with that thought, watching the lamp flicker, and the sky darkened by slow degrees. Stars emerged again, shyly at first, then in clusters, spreading across the sky like grains of salt spilled on blue velvet. The villa, once busy with tools and sandals and whispers, now rested again, and Lucius, full from supper and full from the day, returned to his small room. He lay in bed with his clay leaf in hand, turning it gently in the light. Outside, crickets had begun their song, a low, rhythmic chorus rising and falling in waves, a lullaby written by the land itself. He closed his eyes, not from tiredness alone, but from peace. The night wrapped the villa in its calm, its ancient, endless rhythm, and the Roman Empire, vast and mighty elsewhere, here whispered only of stillness, morning. Light returned gently to the villa once more, filtering through the woven shutters like threads of gold. The breeze carried the scent of rosemary and warmed earth, rising softly from the garden below. The rhythm of life in the villa began again, not rushed, not loud, but calm and constant. Like a river flowing through time, Lucius awoke to the sound of doves cooing softly beneath the eaves. He rose, stretching his arms as the linen sheets fell away. The clay leaf still rested on his shelf beside the small fish lamp. He had finished the day. Before, he ran his fingers across the surface, smooth, finished, his own, down the corridor. Elia moved quietly between the kitchen hearth and the courtyard basin. She poured warm water into a terracotta jug and set it by the door. Breakfast was simple today. Barley porridge with a drizzle of honey and a few dried apricots she had soaked overnight. Gaius sat on the edge of the peristyle fountain, quietly, inspecting a sprig of laurel he had plucked from the garden wall. Cassianus joined him, and the two sat together in companionable silence as the early light danced across the rippling surface of the impluvium pool. "You see how calm it is," Gaius said. "Looking at the water, even a single leaf will leave. Ripples that take time to settle." Cassianus nodded, watching as a small petal floated from the roof above and landed in the water, sending soft circles outward. Lucius joined them shortly after, taking his seat beside his father. Elia appeared with a cup of warm water steeped with mint and passed it to Cassianus. "This is the part of the day I like best," she said, "before the heat. Before the tools start clanging." Gaius smiled. "It's the part where everything listens." That morning, they walked the outer orchard. The sunlight streamed through the olive branches, dappling the path with pale patterns. Gaius showed Lucius how to inspect the bark for signs of beetles, how to pinch the leaves between his fingers to test their health. Lucius followed carefully, each step deliberate, his hands learning the language of trees. At midday, they returned to the villa, where cool water and shaded walls offered relief from the growing warmth. Elia laid out a cloth in the atrium, placing on it a plate of soft cheese olives and small lentil cakes wrapped in vine leaves. The family gathered again, their voices low, their gestures slow. There was no need for haste. The empire could wait. After lunch, the villa entered its quiet hours. Gaius napped on a low couch, his arm draped over his eyes. Cassianus took a reed and a piece of wax tablet to copy a passage from a scroll he had admired that morning. Elia retreated to her garden corner, where she pressed dried flowers between cloth sheets, and Lucius, with his tools beside him, began shaping a small sculpture. A sleeping dog curled beneath an olive tree. The hours passed like a soft tide, one moment folding into the next. Outside, the cicadas began their song, a soft, rattling hum that came and went with the wind. It filled the space between moments like a thread stitching the afternoon together. Later in the afternoon, a visitor arrived, an old family friend, Marcia, who lived a half-day's journey toward the coast. She brought with her a basket of fresh salt bread and a carved wooden ladle, wrapped in linen. "From the seaside trees," she said, handing it to Elia with a warm embrace. "The wood bends but never breaks." They sat her down beneath the arbor, and Elia poured her a cup of wine mixed with a bit of well water and honey. They caught up slowly, without urgency. Marcia spoke of her garden by the sea, of gulls that nested on her roof tiles, of a lizard that had learned to beg for figs at her doorstep. Her words were quiet, her laughter soft and well-timed as the sun began to fall again, casting long shadows over the stone pots and colonnades. Lucius brought out his sculpture to show everyone. The dog's body was nearly complete, its limbs folded neatly under, its head resting peacefully on a pair of carved paws. "It's sleeping," he said. Cassianus knelt to inspect it. "It looks very real. I almost expect it to sigh." Lucius beamed, his cheeks warm with pride. Elia placed a hand gently on his shoulder. "It belongs in the garden," she said, "where the olive tree bends just slightly, near the rosemary bush." Gaius nodded. "That spot is always quiet, a place for rest." As twilight settled over the villa once more, the little sculpture was placed in its corner of the garden. The lamp was lit again, its flame now a familiar companion at each day's end. The family sat beneath the arbor, joined by Marcia, sharing the evening meal. Roasted chickpeas, soft bread, and a stew of lentils and carrots. Everything simple, everything whole. The stars returned again, finding their familiar places in the sky above. The night air cooled, and the breeze returned, brushing the vines and whistling faintly past the clay roof tiles. Lucius lingered for a while longer in the garden after the others had gone inside. He sat near his sculpture, listening to the insects sing and the leaves rustle. The night didn't feel dark or lonely. It felt full of quiet, of memories, of time moving gently forward. When he finally returned to his room, he lay down and closed his eyes with ease. The clay leaf still rested on his shelf. The fish lamp stood watch by his bedside. And in the corner of the garden, a small dog slept beneath the olive tree, forever at peace. And once more, the villa, the empire in miniature, slipped into sleep, wrapped in the soft night of a world that knew how to rest. Another day dawned, and with it came a pale shimmer across the stone walls of the villa, like the brushstroke of a calm painter touching canvas for the first time. Morning was not a sudden event here, but a gentle unfolding, one moment blending seamlessly into the next, like silk unraveling in slow motion. Lucius awoke to the soft hum of bees near his open window. The garden beyond had bloomed gently. Overnight, fresh dew glistening on the rosemary and thyme. He lingered in bed a little longer, eyes half closed, simply listening. The rustling of leaves, the cooing of doves, the faint thud of sandals on distant stone. It was the sound of home. He rose quietly and moved through the corridor, barefoot and slow. His clay fish lamp stood cold now, but he touched it nonetheless. A small morning ritual, a reminder of yesterday's work and the patience it had taken. In the kitchen, Elia was seated near the hearth, a steaming bowl in front of her. She looked up and smiled gently. "Warm milk and cinnamon," she whispered, "for waking without hurry." Lucius accepted the cup and held it with both hands, letting the steam kiss his face before sipping. Gaius was nearby, grinding herbs in a small bowl. He crushed them not with force, but with rhythm, letting the motion guide the mixture rather than his strength. The scent of chamomile and dried orange peel drifted upward. Cassianus soon entered, stretching his arms slowly, joints cracking with age, but not complaint. He poured himself water from the jug and sat quietly. They all shared the same silence, not awkward or empty, but full, like music between notes. After breakfast, Lucius wandered through the atrium. The marble basin at its center reflected the morning sky like a still mirror. A single laurel leaf floated on the surface, casting shadows that wavered softly with each breath of breeze. He watched it for a time before moving on, fingers trailing along the ivy that climbed the columns. Outside, a small group of villa workers prepared tools near the lower terraces. Today, the vines would be trimmed, not just for neatness, but to prepare them for stronger spring growth. Gaius joined them, his voice low and kind, directing with gestures rather than orders. Lucius followed his father down the gentle slope, sandals crunching softly on gravel. The vine rows stood like quiet sentinels, leaves fluttering slightly as if they, too, were preparing for the trimming. Gaius showed Lucius the knife, not large, but curved, its edge kept sharp with care. He demonstrated on a single branch, clipping cleanly, his wrist relaxed. Lucius repeated the motion, slowly, carefully. The vine gave way with a soft snap. He smiled, back at the villa. Elia was mending linens in the shaded corner of the peristyle. She worked with steady fingers, guiding the needle through the soft fabric like a breeze threading through grass. Her mending basket, filled with threads of muted colors, sat beside a bowl of sliced pears and dates. Cassianus joined her later, bringing a scroll of poetry, verses written long ago, in another province, by a man who had once tended gardens near the sea. He read a few lines aloud. They spoke of stillness, of gentle days, of olive branches dancing in moonlight. Elia listened, nodding slightly with each stanza, as though she had always known these words in her own way. At midday, the villa paused. Again, Lucius returned from the fields with grape leaves in his hair and dust on his tunic. He washed his hands in the courtyard basin, the water cool and clear, and sat beneath the fig tree in the inner garden. A plate of lentil stew waited for him, along with a piece of honey bread wrapped in cloth. He ate slowly, savoring each bite, while Cassianus continued reading by the arbor. Gaius returned a bit later, wiping his brow with a damp cloth and pouring himself a cup of cool wine mixed with water. Elia served slices of soft cheese, garnished with mint. That afternoon, Lucius helped tidy the storeroom. He arranged amphorae in neat rows, brushing dust from the tops, checking each seal. He liked the way the jars felt, heavy, ancient, their surfaces warm from the sun. Some had small marks scratched into the clay, a dolphin, a vine, a crescent, moon, tiny symbols from long ago. Elia passed through now and then, bringing dried herbs to hang or folded cloths to store. Each time she entered, the room felt calmer, as if even the jars and shelves responded to her quiet presence. Later, as the sun dipped lower, Lucius returned to his workshop corner. He began shaping a small dish, a shallow bowl with a design of waves carved around the rim. His fingers moved with newfound confidence. He had learned to let the clay speak, to guide his hands rather than command them. In the garden, the sculpture of the sleeping dog remained undisturbed, its shape blended so naturally with the earth and olive tree behind it that birds often hopped near it without fear. It had become part of the place, like the vines, the stone walls, the breath of the wind through the columns. As evening arrived, the air cooled again. The lamp was lit. The villa gathered, as it always did, around a simple meal and simple stories. Marcia had stayed another day and shared a tale of a fisherman who swore he could hear the sea speak back to him, not in words, but in rhythms. They laughed gently at the idea, but no one doubted the truth of it. And once more, night blanketed the hills and fields, and the stars returned overhead, not in grandeur, but in quiet, constant light. Elia trimmed the lamp's wick. Lucius yawned, his head resting on his folded arms for a moment before rising. The villa sighed softly, like a contented animal settling into sleep. And beneath the old olive tree, in a place where time moved slowly and hearts beat quietly. The Roman world rested once again, not conquered, not counting victories, but breathing, simply and fully, in peace. The next morning arrived with a soft haze covering the distant hills, a thin veil of silver light that made the world seem quieter than usual, as though even the wind hadn't fully woken up yet. The villa lay wrapped in its own breath, the stone walls cool to the touch, and the garden glistening gently with dew. Lucius stirred early. His dreams had been quiet and strange, filled with birds that spoke in riddles and streams that ran uphill. He blinked the sleep from his eyes, then reached for his tunic, slipping it over his head while the room remained still. The fish lamp on his shelf had burned out long ago. Leaving behind the soft scent of olive oil and ash, he padded down the corridor, the tiles cool beneath his feet. In the kitchen, Elia was already tending the coals. She greeted him with a warm nod and handed him a fig, freshly split, the inside glowing like a sunset in miniature. "Eat slowly," she whispered. "It's still a gentle hour." Lucius sat near the hearth and did just that. Outside, he could hear the soft rustle of vines brushing against the stone wall, the first call of a bird beginning its daily song. Gaius entered not long after, stretching his arms with a quiet groan before accepting a cup of warm barley drink from Elia. Cassianus followed soon behind, already dressed for the day, his eyes still heavy with sleep. This morning, there were no great tasks awaiting them. The fields had been trimmed, the tools had been stored, and the workers had taken their rest day. It was a rare kind of morning, one where time felt suspended, where each moment could be held and examined like a polished stone. They decided to walk, not far, not fast, just along the edge of the estate, where the vineyard met the wild grasses, and the hills opened like arms to the sky. Elia gathered her shawl. Lucius brought along a small satchel with bread and olives. Gaius carried a walking stick he had carved years ago, its handle shaped like a dolphin leaping through waves. The four of them moved slowly, letting the morning unfold around them. They passed the olive trees, still bearing fruit from the last season. Their gnarled trunks twisted like old dancers in mid-motion. The air was cool, touched with pine and distant sea dot. As they reached a bend in the path, they stopped and sat beneath a large fig tree whose branches created a dome of shade. From here, they could see the valley below, tiled rooftops, a slow-moving river, and the pale ribbon of a road snaking off into the horizon. Cassianus picked up a small stone and tossed it lightly, watching it bounce once before settling in. "The dust, this is what I thought Rome would feel like," he said. Gaius raised an eyebrow. "You mean quiet?" Cassianus smiled, not in sound, in soul. Elia passed around small pieces of bread. Lucius lay back against the grass, his fingers running through wild thyme. The world seemed paused, even the cicadas had grown quiet, and the breeze had stilled into something softer than silence. They stayed there a while, not because they needed to, but because they wanted to. Because in a world filled with duty and empire, it was rare to find a corner of time that asked for nothing but presence. Later, back at the villa, Lucius resumed work on his carved bowl. He had finished the wave pattern and now began to press small dots along the rim. Mimicking the spray of the sea, Elia watched from the arbor, spinning thread on her drop spindle. The rhythm steady and slow. Cassianus and Gaius returned to the study, where they examined a map drawn on waxed parchment. The roads of Latium, the hills near Tibur, the trade lines that wound down toward Campania. They spoke not of conquest or gold, but of olives, of pottery, of friendships made over shared fields and borrowed tools. In the late afternoon, a quiet visitor arrived, a wandering priest from a nearby shrine, clad in white wool, a wreath of dried laurel on his shoulder. He came not to preach, but to offer a blessing. He walked the perimeter of the villa, murmuring words of peace in a voice as calm as the evening sky. He stopped to touch the old fig tree, the amphory lined against the storeroom wall, the basin that held rainwater for the birds. Then, beneath the grapevine canopy, he said a final prayer for sleep, that it come easily, that it rest deeply, that it stay long enough to heal. When he left behind a single sprig of bay leaf, which Elia placed near the lamp in the atrium. That night, the family gathered once again. Dinner was simple: wheat cakes with cheese, a small bowl of lentils, and a roasted apple for each of them, glazed with honey and herbs. The sky outside turned darker shade by shade, and the lamp's glow reached farther with each passing moment. Lucius told a story he'd made up, of a boy who could speak to fish, and of a dolphin that carried him across the sea. Elia smiled, and added a detail: the dolphin only appeared during new moons. Cassianus said he once knew a sailor who believed such a tale. Gaius listened, then said nothing, just laughed softly, eyes half closed, content. As the meal ended, Lucius returned to the sleeping dog sculpture in the garden. He sat beside it again, as he often did now, and leaned back against the olive tree. The stars had begun to appear, slow and deliberate. 1, then 3, then dozens, scattered like seeds across the vast, dark field. He whispered a good night to the garden, to the clay figures, to the vines and stones and wind. And then, once more, he made his way to his bed, heart full and light. Inside, the villa dimmed, the lamp burned low, and across the hills, the Roman world rested, not in glory or power, but in peace, in stillness, in the unspoken language of quiet, ordinary beauty. And as Lucius closed his eyes, the night folded around him like a warm blanket, deep, gentle, and endless. The new day arrived not with a trumpet, but with a whisper, a pale light creeping along the stone columns and across the worn mosaic tiles, dusting every surface with a faint golden haze. The villa stirred gently, as if waking from a dream it didn't wish to leave too soon. Lucius blinked at the ceiling above his bed, following the soft patterns of light that shimmered through the shutters. For a moment, he didn't move. His breathing matched the breeze, slow, measured, serene. It was the kind of morning that asked nothing but presence. In the corridor, the quiet was absolute, broken only by the hush of a broom across the tiles. Elia, already at her tasks, sweeping the dust with long, graceful strokes, as though guiding the rhythm of the house itself. She glanced up as Lucius entered, her eyes warm, her hand pausing only briefly. "Good morning," she said, not louder than a hum. Lucius smiled and nodded, walking barefoot toward the kitchen, where a clay pot simmered gently. The smell of boiled grain and honey wafted upward, mingled with the faint scent of lavender drying near the window. Gaius entered moments later, scratching his beard thoughtfully and sipping from a cup of warm water infused with sage. Cassianus followed, still tying the cord of his tunic, his steps quiet and unhurried. Today, they decided to stay close to the villa. The fields could wait. The workers had been sent home early the evening before, a small reward for the last week's labors. Even the animals sensed the stillness. The chickens clucked softly in their coop, and the dog from the lower garden lay curled beneath a bench, eyes half-lidded. Gaius and Cassianus made their way to the study, where they began sorting scrolls in preparation for the coming season. Each was labeled in neat ink: harvest rituals, stars of the spring sky, medicinal plants of the hill country. They read a few passages aloud, voices low, amused by the annotations scribbled in the margins by scribes long gone. Lucius sat by the courtyard fountain, sketching in the dust with a reed. He drew lines that curled like vines, then shaped them into boats, stars, and hills. Elia passed by and handed him a small piece of charcoal, nodding toward a broken shard of tile. "Something more permanent," she suggested. He began again, pressing the charcoal gently into the pale clay. This time, he drew the villa itself, the columns, the fountain, the olive tree, the little sleeping dog beneath it. His lines were soft but sure. He knew this place by heart now. At midday, they gathered under the arbor. The table was set simply: slices of soft bread, olives cured with lemon, dried apricots, and a bowl of lentils seasoned with coriander and cumin. The meal was shared with very little talking, not because of silence, but because everything was already understood. Afterward, the family split like branches in a breeze. Cassianus retreated to his corner to copy verses by wax tablet. Elia returned to her basket of mending and folded linens. Gaius sat near the peristyle garden, sun on his shoulders, sorting through seeds for the next planting. Lucius wandered toward the rear terrace, a quiet spot where pots of herbs grew in terracotta jars. He knelt beside a basil plant, pressing his fingers into the damp soil. It smelled rich and alive. He stayed there for some time, watching a ladybug crawl across a leaf. Later, he returned to the sculpture he had begun days earlier, a small figure of a bird, wings curled in mid-rest. He worked slowly, shaping each feather with the rounded edge of a reed, smoothing the surface with his fingertips dipped in water. He hummed softly, a melody he couldn't name, but had always known. By late afternoon, the light shifted once again, from golden to amber, casting long shadows that draped the villa in warmth. A quiet breeze returned, brushing the grapevines, sending tiny leaves dancing along the colonnade. That evening, they shared dinner outside, roasted vegetables, wrapped in fig leaves, a bowl of barley stew, and small honey cakes Elia had made earlier in the day. The lamp burned steadily on the table, its flame mirrored in every pair of eyes. As they ate, Lucius recited the beginning of a story he had written about a young sailor who spoke with sea creatures and who followed a comet across the waves. In search of a whisper only he could hear, Cassianus listened with interest. And does he find what he's looking for? Lucius nodded, then paused. Not exactly, but he finds something better. They all sat with that thought, letting the evening deepen around them. Later, Gaius placed a hand on Lucius's shoulder. You see now, he said, the smallest things, a breeze, a seed, a clay dish, these are the world. And when you see them as such, you begin to understand what truly matters. Lucius said nothing, but nodded, his chest full of quiet pride. That night, the stars returned again, as they always did, not loud, not grand, but faithful. The villa sank into peaceful darkness, each lamp extinguished one by one, until only the glow of the sky remained. And as Lucius closed his eyes, the quiet of the Roman night wrapped around him, like a gentle tide, steady, calming, and endless. The next morning brought a gentle mist to the hills surrounding the villa, softening the edges of the world. The trees beyond the garden seemed to drift in and out of view, like memories being recalled in fragments. A layer of dew coated the stone walkways, catching the early light in silver droplets. The air was damp, earthy, and calm. Lucius woke slowly, stretching beneath his linen blanket, the cool air brushing against his skin. He lingered for a while, letting the hush of the villa surround him. From beyond the walls, he could hear only the faintest sounds, a bird's distant call, the trickle of water from the garden basin, the soft rhythm of someone walking with measured steps on the mosaic tiles. Today, he felt no hurry, no obligation, just the steady pulse of life continuing in the quiet of Rome's countryside. When he stepped into the kitchen, Elia was there, as always, not rushing, not bustling, simply being. She was slicing small loaves of bread, their crusts golden and still warm from the oven. On the table beside her lay a bowl of soft cheese sprinkled with herbs, a handful of fresh figs, and a pot of thick, dark honey. Figs are especially sweet today, she said softly, handing him one with a smile. Lucius bit into it, and the flavor filled his mouth, rich and mellow, as if it had soaked up the morning itself. Cassianus soon joined them, his hands behind his back, quietly observing a bird hopping along the windowsill. I've seen that one before, he murmured. It's bold, visits nearly every morning now. They watched it together for a moment before it flitted away, disappearing into the mist. After breakfast, Gaius suggested they visit the upper field, not for work, but for air. The path was lined with wildflowers, their petals jeweled with moisture, bending under the weight of dew. They walked slowly, the mist curling around their ankles, the hills vanishing and reappearing with every step. At the crest of the field, they stopped. Below them, the world stretched in soft layers, groves, rooftops, winding roads, and patches of farmland bathed in morning fog. The villa behind them seemed a small dot nestled in the curve of the earth, as if it, too, had paused to admire the view. Cassianus pulled a small scroll from the pouch at his side. I copied this from a temple wall near Ostia, he said, unrolling it with care. It's a prayer for stillness, he read aloud, slowly, letting each word settle in the air like falling leaves. The verses spoke of the moon's gentle pull, the silence of winter fields, the patience of stone, When he finished, no one spoke, not from awe, but from contentment. Lucius sat on a patch of grass, running his fingers through the dew-covered blades. Elia offered him a plum from her satchel, its skin deep purple and cool to the touch. Gaius reclined with his hands behind his head, eyes closed, breathing in deeply as if to store the peace for later. They remained there for most of the morning, saying little, simply watching the fog slowly lift and reveal the world beneath. By midday, they returned to the villa, where the warmth of the hearth welcomed them back like an old friend. The mist had given way to soft sunlight, and the stone walls radiated quiet comfort. Lucius spent the afternoon with Clay again, not at the wheel, but sitting cross-legged in the corner of the workshop, sculpting a new piece by hand. This time, he shaped a small olive branch, each leaf delicate, each curve careful. It wasn't for anyone. It didn't have to be. It was just a moment captured in his palms. Meanwhile, Elia steeped herbs in a small pot by the window. The scent of chamomile and lavender filled the air. She poured the mixture into tiny clay cups and carried them one by one to the others. No words, just warm hands passing warmth. Cassianus was writing again, translating a favorite phrase from Latin into Greek, then into simple pictures for Lucius to understand. Words change, he said as he worked, but their feeling remains. Outside, the wind picked up ever so slightly. The grapevines rustled. A shutter tapped gently against the stone, and in the garden, the sculpture of the sleeping dog remained, undisturbed, a part of the earth now, as familiar as any tree or stone. That evening, Gaius suggested they eat in the side courtyard, where the shadows stretched long and the breeze moved more freely. The meal was humble, lentil stew with coriander and a touch of garlic, a loaf of herb bread still warm from the hearth, and a dish of olives soaked in wine. The lamp was lit early tonight. Its flame flickered calmly, casting soft rings of light on the stone walls. As they ate, they spoke quietly of small things. A dream Elia had of walking through an orchard where the trees whispered names. A story Cassianus remembered about a farmer who could predict rain by the smell of earth. A memory Gaius shared of Lucius's first clay bowl, still kept in a corner of the storeroom. After dinner, Lucius wandered to the edge of the garden wall. He stood there, looking out at the horizon. The last light of day painting the hills in gold and violet, the stars began to bloom, slow and deliberate, like flowers in reverse. Behind him, the villa hushed itself once again, the clink of dishes being cleared, the last words of the day exchanged in gentle tones, and the creak of a wooden chair settling under no weight. Lucius turned back toward the house, the lamplight guiding his steps. Inside, his bed awaited him, simple, firm, familiar. His clay sculpture rested on the shelf nearby. A fresh fig sat on the windowsill, a quiet gift from Elia. And beyond the walls, the Roman countryside held its breath, resting once more under the stars. And so, in the soft cradle of stone and silence, with dreams waiting just beneath his eyelids, Lucius let the day go, slowly, gratefully, completely. The day began before the sun had fully risen, when the world was still wrapped in quiet shadows, and the sky shimmered faintly with the earliest light. It was a time when the villa seemed to breathe more slowly. Holding on to sleep just a little longer, Lucius lay awake, his eyes half open, listening to the sounds of a waking home. Somewhere in the courtyard, a small breeze rustled the olive branches. A door creaked softly. The low murmur of someone's footsteps passed down the hall, careful, measured, and familiar. The kind of sound that didn't disturb sleep, but carried it gently into waking. He sat up slowly, stretching his arms before placing his feet on the cool floor. A pale band of dawn slipped through the window, casting soft lines across the floor. He washed his face in a bowl of water that had been left near the windowsill the night before, the touch of it fresh and clarifying, like the first breath of morning. In the kitchen, Elia was already awake, quietly preparing a pot of barley porridge. She greeted him with a glance and a gentle nod, the kind of wordless communication that only years of closeness could create. The smell of warm grain mixed with the scent of mint leaves, steeping in water. "Sit," she whispered. "The day will wait." Lucius joined her at the small wooden table, sipping from a clay cup as steam curled toward the ceiling. Cassianus arrived soon after, still tying his robe, hair slightly tousled. He sat down without a word, letting the calm soak in before the day properly began. Gaius was last to enter, his steps slow, his beard still damp from washing. He carried a small piece of parchment with him, a simple list of tasks for the day. None of them urgent, just small things to keep the rhythm of life moving forward. After breakfast, the family dispersed quietly. Elia went to the storeroom to organize herbs, sorting lavender, sage, and marjoram into woven baskets lined with cloth. Gaius made his way to the tool shed to inspect the handles of the scythes and oil the blades with care. Cassianus took a book of poetry to the bench beneath the fig tree and read in the dappled light. Lucius returned to the workshop, where his little clay bird sat drying on a shelf. He checked it gently with his fingertip. The surface had hardened, but still held a softness. Like the memory of touch, today, he would begin a new piece. He kneaded a fresh ball of clay on a wooden board, pressing into it slowly, letting the air escape in tiny hisses. He wasn't in a hurry. There was no need to be. Each motion was thoughtful, patient, deliberate. He began shaping a small oil lamp, not unlike the one he kept by his bed. This one, though, would have a design of olive leaves and stars. He traced the lines carefully, letting the clay tell him where to press, where to pause, where to smooth. Outside, the sun climbed gently through the sky, casting soft shadows along the columns of the villa. The day unfolded not with urgency, but with a sense of quiet order. In the afternoon, they shared a light meal beneath the arbor, bread with rosemary, goat cheese wrapped in grape leaves, and slices of sweet apple sprinkled with cinnamon. The lamp at the center of the table wasn't lit yet, but it stood ready, waiting for dusk. As they ate, Elia recounted a memory of her own childhood, a walk through an olive grove with her grandmother, who had known every tree by name and believed they whispered secrets to those who listened closely. I didn't believe her then, Elia said, smiling softly, but now I think maybe she was right. Cassianus chuckled. Wisdom always sounds like nonsense when we're young. They laughed gently, the sound mingling with the rustling leaves above them. Later, Lucius returned to the rear garden, where the sculpture of the sleeping dog still rested beneath the olive tree. He sat beside it, back against the trunk, and watched the sun begin its slow descent. The light turned softer, warmer, casting long shadows that reached like fingers across the villa. From here, he could see the hills in the distance, faint and golden, like a dream drifting just out of reach. A few workers passed far off on the road, their silhouettes hazy and slow-moving. He closed his eyes for a moment and listened. The hum of insects, the call of birds returning to their nests, the faint clink of pottery in the kitchen, all the sounds of home, all the sounds of peace. When he opened his eyes again, the stars were beginning to show, pale and shy, peeking through the dimming blue. As evening deepened, the family gathered once more. Drawn by the quiet gravity of routine, the table was set, the lamp was lit, and the meal was shared in soft voices and slower movements. Afterward, Cassianus read a passage from a scroll about the constellations, how they were named, what stories they carried. Lucius listened closely, imagining each star as a thread connecting him to every generation before. I think we live inside the stories, he said quietly. Not just tell them. Elia placed her hand on his, and the quiet ones are often the truest. That night, as the villa dimmed and the last flame flickered in the kitchen hearth, Lucius returned to his bed. His clay lamp, now finished, sat beside him. He hadn't yet lit it, but he would in time. For now, it was enough just to see it there. A small thing he had made with his own hands, shaped from silence and patience. Outside, the olive trees swayed in the evening breeze. The sky was full now, stars scattered like seeds over a sleeping empire. The dog sculpture lay still in the garden, and somewhere, beyond the hills and roads and rooftops, the rest of the world turned slowly on. But here, in this villa, in this night, Lucius let the day go. He lay down, closed his eyes, and listened to the quiet, and the quiet answered back. The morning rose gently, not with brilliance, but with a quiet certainty. The villa was wrapped in a silvery stillness, where even the shadows stretched slowly, taking their time to wake. The breeze whispered through the vines like a careful hand smoothing rumpled linen, and all around the countryside, there was a sense of ease, of stillness, of long exhalations. Lucius woke to the coolness of morning air on his face. The window had been left slightly open, just enough for the scent of the earth to drift into his room, soft clay, warm stone, and a hint of rosemary carried from the garden. He sat up slowly, stretching with the natural rhythm of someone who had no rush, no weight pressing against his day. Down the hallway, a quiet conversation floated to his ears. Gaius and Elia discussing whether the fig tree near the garden needed trimming, their voices barely above a murmur. Cassianus could be heard humming faintly, a slow melody that moved like a river, steady and curving. In the kitchen, the morning meal had already been prepared, a simple offering of lentil cakes, olives, and warm milk sweetened with crushed dates. Elia placed a cloth over the bread to keep it warm and waved Lucius over without a word. He sat and ate slowly, mindful of each bite, savoring the familiar flavors that had become part of his days. Today, Gaius said as he broke a piece of bread, "We walked to the edge of the olive grove." Lucius looked up. "All the way to the spring?" Gaius nodded, smiling. "Yes, the old one." It had been some time since they had visited the spring, a shaded hollow beyond the farthest rows of olive trees, where water trickled from the hillside and gathered in a stone basin. Carved generations ago, it was not far, but far enough to feel like a journey, a peaceful, slow unfolding of distance. They gathered light cloaks, filled a small satchel with cheese and bread, and set off as the sun began its climb. The path wound through the groves, between gnarled trees heavy with fruit, their branches arching above like weathered arms holding the sky. Lucius walked with Gaius and Cassianus, Elia not far behind, her pace unhurried. They spoke little, letting the sounds of the land guide their steps, the cooing of doves, the snap of twigs beneath sandals, the faint rustle of leaves moved by the breeze. When they reached the spring, they paused. It was just as Lucius remembered, a gentle trickle of water spilling into the stone basin, the air around it cool and damp. Ferns grew in the cracks of the rock, and the light filtered down through the trees in golden ribbons. The water was clear and still, reflecting the branches above like a mirror. They sat by the edge, removing their sandals and dipping their feet into the basin. The cold water curled around their toes, and each of them exhaled, not in surprise, but in relief. It was the kind of cold that made you feel awake in the best way. Gaius produced a small scroll from his cloak, a prayer to the spirit of the spring, one handed down from old writings. He read it aloud, his voice low and respectful, not for ceremony, but for gratitude. To the water that never dries, to the stone that always holds, to the breath between seasons, peace to you and peace to us. When he finished, silence returned. Not empty silence, but full, like a bowl filled to the brim. They stayed there for a long while, sharing the bread and cheese, sipping water from the spring cupped in their hands. Lucius traced the carvings on the basin, names and symbols left by those who came before. Some were smooth with time, others still sharp, like they had just been cut. "This one," Gaius said, pointing to a small spiral, "is said to be a sign of returning. The cycle. What goes out, comes back." Lucius nodded slowly, "Like this place exactly," Gaius replied. As the sun began its descent, casting the grove in gentle gold, they gathered their things and returned to the villa. The path home felt different, softer, as though it welcomed their return. The vines swayed in rhythm with their steps, and even the birds seemed to sing with a quieter joy. Back at the villa, the shadows stretched long across the floor. The air was cool and still. Elia went to the kitchen to prepare a pot of herbal tea, infusing it with mint and chamomile. Cassianus lit the small wall lamp near the atrium, its flame flickering like a heartbeat. Lucius returned to his clay, his hands finding a steady rhythm again, shaping a small dish decorated with a spiral pattern. He pressed the symbol into the clay gently, with full intention, not just for design, but for memory. That evening, they ate on the terrace. Dinner was simple, lentils with honey, wild greens from the garden, and flatbread warm from the stone oven. They talked about the spring, the carvings, the prayer. Gaius spoke of how his father had once brought him there, and how he too had sat by the water in silence. "It's not the place that matters most," he said, "but the stillness it gives us." Lucius remembered those words as he lay down that night. The lamp by his bed glowed softly, casting shadows on the wall that swayed gently like leaves in wind. Outside, the trees held the night in their branches, the spring still whispered in. The hills beyond, the world turned slowly, quietly, and inside the villa, breath by breath, sleep came, not suddenly, not with force, but like a familiar story told gently, until the listener drifts off in peace. Dawn touched the villa with a brush of cool light, softening every surface it touched. The stone walls, the clay pots, the folds of linen curtains swaying gently. In the morning air, it was a day that didn't rush, the kind of day that greeted you quietly, asking nothing in return except to notice. Lucius rose slowly, as he always did now, not to chase the sun, but to meet it. His room smelled faintly of old paper, lavender, and fresh air. The charcoal drawing he had made the previous afternoon still rested on the windowsill, untouched but illuminated, its lines more poetic in the new light. He stepped into his sandals and moved through the silent corridor, each footfall a soft whisper against the cool floor. The scent of warm bread greeted him before he even reached the kitchen. Elia had already begun her morning, her sleeves rolled up, her hands dusted. "With flour, a fresh loaf resting in a clay dish sleep well?" she asked, not turning. Lucius nodded, then poured himself a small cup of warm barley water from the jug beside the hearth. He sat near the window, letting the quiet fill him. Outside, a pair of doves perched on the roof beam, their feathers puffed. Against the chill, Cassianus entered soon after, carrying a scroll and rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Today," he said softly, "I want to finish copying the verses from the Temple of Fortuna. I think they'll fit well in our collection." Elia smiled. "There's always room for fortune." The morning passed slowly. Gaius spent it in the storeroom, sorting jars of grain and dried fruits, humming to himself. Lucius returned to his workshop to finish his dish with the spiral motif, pressing each mark with care. His hands were steady now, practiced, thoughtful. He no longer sculpted to prove he could, but simply because it felt right to do so. As the sun rose higher, they paused for a light meal beneath the arbor, slices of melon, pieces of cheese, olives soaked in rosemary, and a handful of roasted chickpeas. The breeze was mild and kind, the shadows gently dancing across the table. A traveling merchant passed by the villa gate that afternoon, pulling a small cart filled with dyed cloth and glazed beads. They welcomed him with water and bread, and he shared quiet tales from towns near the coast, of distant markets, of unfamiliar winds, of ships with red sails. Lucius listened with interest, but not longing. He was curious, not restless. The world beyond the hills sounded beautiful. Yes, but not more beautiful than what he had come to know here. As the merchant continued down the road, Cassianus said, "Sometimes I wonder if the faraway places are meant only to remind us how much peace we already have." Lucius agreed with a quiet smile. Later that day, they returned to the upper terrace, bringing small cushions and baskets of fresh herbs to sort: thyme, sage, and pennyroyal. Elia laid them out in rows, letting the sunlight draw out their fragrance. The leaves crackled gently in her fingers, and the air around them was soon filled with the scent of earth and memory. Cassianus read aloud from the scroll he had mentioned earlier, lines about fate not as a force to fear, but as something woven slowly and kindly, like thread into cloth. "Even the quiet life is written in stars," he read. "And not all heroes carry swords." The words felt as if they belonged there, not lofty or distant, but nestled perfectly in the moment. Like a stone in a stream dot in the late afternoon, Lucius found himself near the old olive press, a part of the villa he hadn't visited in weeks. The large wooden beam, though unused now, still held the marks of seasons past, oil stains, knife cuts, grooves from years of turning and pressing. He placed his hand on the beam, feeling its age, its quiet dignity. He imagined all the hands that had touched it before his, not famous hands, just real ones, patient, skilled, steady. It made him feel rooted, part of something bigger than stories or history, part of life. As dusk began to settle, the villa turned inward once more. Lamps were lit, cushions were fluffed, and bowls of warm lentils were passed hand to hand in the gathering dark. After dinner, they gathered near the hearth. Gaius told a story, not of emperors or battles, but of a single olive tree that had lived 100 years, and how a boy once carved his name into its bark. The tree had not minded. In fact, it seemed to remember. Sometimes, Gaius said, it's not that the tree becomes part of the boy's story, it's that the boy becomes part of the tree's. Lucius sat still, watching the firelight flicker across the stone walls. That image stayed with him. A tree, a name, a memory, so simple, so complete. As the fire burned lower, and the voices softened to silence, they each moved to their rooms. Without hurry, the night embraced the villa slowly, as if tucking in each stone, each breath, each thought. Lucius returned to his chamber and placed his new clay dish on the shelf. He lit the small lamp beside it, watching the shadows it cast. Spirals and curves, gentle shapes that moved like lullabies. Outside, the wind moved softly through the olive trees. The stars settled into their patterns, old and constant, and in that peace, surrounded by warmth, Lucius let go of the day, one breath at a time, one dream at a time, until only sleep remained. The next morning arrived not with fanfare but with stillness, as if the world had chosen to remain hushed a little longer. The sky was pale and gentle, layered with soft clouds that moved slowly across the hills like drifting thoughts. The kind of day meant for reflection, not motion. Lucius stirred beneath his linen blanket, feeling the light touch of morning air through the open window. He stayed still for a long while, his eyes half open, just listening. A soft bird call from the garden, the distant bark of a dog, the creak of old wood expanding in the warming air, all familiar, all peaceful. When he rose, he moved quietly, as though the silence around him was something sacred. In the corridor, he passed Gaius returning from the outer storeroom, carrying a folded cloth and a small pot of dried herbs. Gaius gave a slow nod, not speaking, and continued on. In the kitchen, Elia was rinsing plums in a shallow bowl. Their skin glistened under the light, deep purple with hints of red. She placed one in Lucius's hand as he entered, her fingers cool and steady. "They're sweet," she said softly, and returned to her task. Cassianus was already seated, tracing a charcoal sketch into a small leather-bound book, a bird in flight, its wings wide, its head turned upward. He looked up just long enough to acknowledge Lucius with a warm glance, then went back to his drawing without a word. They ate together in gentle silence. Oatcakes with honey, the plums cut into thin slices, and goat milk warmed over the fire. Outside, the breeze moved slowly through the vines and carried the scent of damp soil into the villa. It was the kind of morning that held stillness like a bowl held water, quietly, carefully. Gaius suggested they spend the day tending to the smaller courtyard, clearing fallen leaves, rearranging the garden stones, and trimming back the ivy that had begun to creep over the outer wall. There was no need for haste. Each task was just another way of listening to the rhythm of life. Lucius gathered a woven basket and joined the others. The courtyard was cool, shaded by tall cypress trees and dotted with clay pots of rosemary, thyme, and lemon balm. A small fountain sat at its center, its trickle as soft as a whisper. Birds often drank there in the afternoon sun, and sometimes Elia left slices of fruit on the ledge for them. They began by sweeping the loose leaves, their dry edges brushing over the stone with a soft, steady sound. Then they worked together to lift the ivy gently from the wall, trimming it with care, never tearing. The leaves were vibrant, their green deepened by the early autumn air. Cassianus read aloud while they worked, verses from an old poem about the seasons turning and the patience of trees. His voice was low and even, blending with the sounds of rustling leaves and distant birdsong. As midday approached, they rested in the shade, seated on smooth stones warmed slightly by the sun. Elia passed around small slices of herb bread and figs wrapped in bay leaves. The flavors were rich but not heavy, and everything about the meal felt rooted, like it belonged there. In that exact moment, Lucius leaned back against the wall, eyes half closed, and watched the light filter through the cypress branches. The shadows played across the stone floor, soft and slow, like thoughts passing through sleep. When they returned to their rooms that afternoon, it wasn't out of fatigue, but because the day itself seemed to invite rest. The villa felt calm, as if it were breathing with them, in and out, quiet and slow. Lucius lay on his bed for a while without sleeping. He looked up at the beams above, tracing the grain of the wood with his eyes. He listened to the wind moving through the fig tree outside his window. He thought of the clay pieces waiting in his workshop, and of the half-finished lamp he would complete tomorrow. But for now, he just let the silence hold him. By late afternoon, the sky had turned golden, not bright, more like a glow that softened every edge, turning the stone walls to honey and the shadows to velvet. Lucius wandered to the back of the villa where the old amphorae were stored. Some had held wine, others oil, but now they rested empty beneath a wooden awning, their surfaces etched with age and use. He sat beside them, picking up a smooth stone and turning it slowly in his hand. Elia joined him with a bundle of dried lavender, which she began tying with linen thread. "I always feel calm here," she said quietly, "even more than in the garden." Lucius nodded. "It's the stillness," he murmured. "It's like everything's already asleep, even while we're awake." Elia smiled and handed him a small bundle. "Keep this in your room, for your dreams." As the sun dipped lower, they returned to the atrium. The light flickered softly through the columns, and the villa's breath slowed even more. Dinner was prepared and shared without hurry, bowls of lentils with cumin, roasted onions, and soft bread with olive oil. A single lamp burned on the table, its flame steady and golden. After the meal, Cassianus read once more, a story about a traveler who sought the edge of the world and found, instead, a place so quiet that it made him forget where he had come from. Elia rested her head on Gaius's shoulder, and Lucius sat cross-legged on the floor, letting the words wash over him. When the story ended, there was no applause, no comment, just silence, and it was enough. Lucius returned to his room under a moon that glowed faintly through the window, casting a pale silver light across the floor. The lavender bundle now rested beside his lamp, and he inhaled its scent deeply. Letting it fill his thoughts, he lay back, eyes half-lidded, and let the sounds of the night carry him. The sigh of wind, the creak of wood, the quiet, steady heartbeat of a home at peace. Sleep came gently, and with it, the kind of dreams that feel more like memories than fantasies. Dreams that begin with stillness and end only when the sun returns. The following morning unfolded like a long breath, unhurried, even, and familiar. A faint mist clung to the stone courtyard, softening the edges of everything it touched. The air was cool, scented with damp leaves and the lingering smoke from the hearth that had slowly died overnight. The world beyond the villa remained still. Cloaked in quiet light, Lucius rose from his bed gently, pushing the blanket aside without a sound. The lavender bundle Elia had given him rested untouched beside his lamp. Its scent, subtle yet steady, had stayed with him through the night. Dreams had come softly, indistinct and weightless, the kind that left no stories behind, only calm. He washed his face with cool water from the basin near the window, the chill a welcome companion to waking. His fingers moved slowly, almost ritually. He took his time dressing, folding the simple linen tunic over his shoulders as the early light filtered through the shutters. In the atrium, Gaius was tending to the small garden plot beside the inner wall. He knelt in silence, his fingers brushing over the dark soil, pulling away bits of withered leaf, repositioning small stones that had shifted in the wind. The garden was never meant to impress. It was meant to grow quietly, faithfully, and it did. "Morning," Gaius said softly, not looking up. Lucius nodded and joined him. Together they worked side by side, without needing to speak. They trimmed the thyme and basil, checked the roots of the carrots, and dusted off the moss-covered corner where water collected in a shallow clay basin. Cassianus appeared a while later, with a folded cloth in one hand and a half-finished letter in the other. "I've been writing about yesterday," he said with a small smile, "about the spring, and the way the ivy moved in the wind." Lucius glanced up. "Write the sounds too," he said. "Those are the parts that stay." Cassianus nodded thoughtfully and sat on the stone step to keep writing, the movement of his reed pen slow and deliberate. By mid-morning, Elia called them in for a warm meal. roasted barley with pine nuts, slices of fresh pear, and mint tea steeped in an old ceramic pot with a crack on one side. No one mentioned the crack. It had been there for years, and it only seemed to add to the pot's comfort. As they ate, the sounds of the villa resumed, the hush of broom bristles on tile, the flap of linen curtains swaying at the doorway, the occasional chirp from the small birds nesting in the vines above the outer wall. All of it wove together like music for those who knew how to listen. That afternoon, the family decided to visit the outer fields, not for work, but to walk. The sun was mild, and the fields had taken on that golden hue that always signaled the middle of the harvest season. The soil smelled rich and deep. The grasses rustled with every step, and far beyond the olive groves, they could see the low hills curving into the horizon. Lucius walked behind Cassianus and Gaius, his hands clasped behind his back, his gaze drifting between the olive branches and the dirt path ahead. Elia lingered beside him, her eyes bright, her sandals brushing against the path with a soft, rhythmic sound. "It always feels like time slows down here," she said quietly. Lucius smiled. "Maybe time just breathes differently." They stopped near a low stone wall overlooking a small valley. The view was wide and gentle, with distant shepherds moving slowly between trees, their shapes blurred by distance and light. The breeze pressed softly against their clothes, bringing with it the scent of crushed herbs and sun-warmed earth. Cassianus sat atop the wall and began sketching what he saw, not with urgency, but with curiosity. "I never get tired of drawing this place," he said. "Every shadow is a new line." They sat there until the sun began to lean westward, casting long, golden rays that fell like drapes across the land. No one spoke much. There was no need. Their silence wasn't empty. It was filled with presence, with the kind of peace that didn't ask for words. When they returned to the villa, the sky had turned soft pink. The courtyard welcomed them back like an old friend. The clay jars lining the walls had warmed in the sun, radiating a quiet heat that faded as the evening deepened. Dinner was made with care and simplicity: lentil stew with coriander, baked squash with herbs, and flatbread with crushed garlic. They ate outside, the table lit by a single oil lamp, its flickering light mirrored in their eyes. As they finished eating, Cassianus unrolled the scroll he had been writing all day. "I'd like to read this," he said. He read slowly, his voice steady and calm. It was not a poem or a story, but a description of the field. The sound of sandals on dust, the quiet curve of the wall overlooking the valley. He had captured everything: the air, the colors, the stillness. When he finished, Elia reached across the table and touched his hand. "That was beautiful," she said, her voice no louder than a breath. After dinner, they lingered in the warmth of the courtyard, the night wrapped around them like a blanket. No tasks remained, nothing to clean, nothing to prepare, just stillness. Lucius returned to his room last, the stars already shining beyond the open window. He looked once more at the lavender bundle, then lay down slowly, letting the day settle into his bones. As his eyes closed, he thought of the field, the low stone wall, the long walk home, and then nothing more, only sleep, deep and dreamless, cradled by quiet. The next day arrived with a silver hush, the kind of morning where even the birds waited a little longer before singing. The air was heavier than usual, not with storm or sadness, but with that rare and sacred kind of stillness that asked you to move slowly, to listen more deeply, to simply be. Lucius awoke with no sense of urgency. His limbs relaxed beneath the thin linen sheet. He lay still for a while, watching the soft flicker of light playing against the ceiling as the wind stirred the olive branches just outside. Somewhere nearby, water dripped rhythmically, a sound that matched the quiet beat of his heart. When he finally rose, he wrapped his light cloak around his shoulders and walked to the basin to wash his face. The water was cool and smooth, and it woke him not with shock, but with clarity. His reflection in the metal mirror was calm, eyes softened by rest. Outside, the villa's corridors were already filled with the slow shuffle of feet. Elia passed him carrying a small clay bowl filled with fresh lavender buds and dried orange peel. She smiled softly and said nothing, moving on toward the storage shelves with graceful ease. In the dining area, Gaius had prepared a simple meal. Barley porridge warmed with cinnamon and sweetened with bits of dried plum. The bowls were set out neatly, steam rising in lazy spirals. Cassianus sat already, his scroll open but untouched, his gaze distant but peaceful. Lucius took his seat, and they ate in silence, each bite a gentle ritual. It wasn't hunger they were feeding, but rhythm, the rhythm of slow mornings, of familiar company, of days that stretched like long paths with no destination. After breakfast, Gaius suggested a visit to the orchard behind the villa, a narrow grove of fig and pomegranate trees that bordered the quiet hills. They hadn't gone in many days, and now, with the weather mild and the breeze low, it felt like the perfect moment to return. They gathered a few satchels and walked slowly, the dirt path winding gently through waist-high grasses and shrubs touched with early autumn color. The trees welcomed them with the rustle of leaves and the smell of ripening fruit. Lucius reached up and picked a fig, gently testing its softness before placing it in his satchel. Elia knelt near the base of a tree, gathering fallen fruit that had ripened early. Cassianus climbed a low branch to sketch the light cutting through the leaves. No one rushed, no one filled the silence. The orchard itself seemed to hum, not with noise, but with life. Bees drifted between blossoms. A small bird landed briefly on a branch near Lucius, tilting its head, unafraid. The air smelled like dust and sweetness, like fruit and bark, like time itself. After filling their satchels, they sat beneath the largest fig tree, sharing slices of fruit and fresh bread. The figs were rich and warm from the sun, their flesh soft and deeply sweet. They ate with their hands, laughing gently when the juice stained their fingers. Cassianus read a short poem he had written, only a few lines, about the orchard, about stillness. It was not meant to impress, only to remember. Beneath these trees, we ask nothing of the day. It gives us fruit, and we give it our time. They remained there until the light began to shift, turning golden through the canopy. Then, slowly, they walked back to the villa, their satchels lighter, their steps unhurried. Back home, the courtyard was warm from the afternoon sun. Elia laid out herbs to dry, mint, marjoram, and fennel, and Cassianus returned to his writing with fresh energy. Gaius inspected a cracked roof tile, tracing its edges with thoughtful fingers. Lucius went to his workshop. Inside the small clay room, the air was cooler. He sat on the floor with a slab of wet clay in front of him and began shaping a small, lidded pot, simple, smooth, balanced. He let his hands do what they knew, no need for planning. It wasn't about perfection, it was about presence. Time passed unnoticed, shadows stretched longer. The light dimmed to amber. By the time Lucius emerged again, the pot was shaped and resting. He washed his hands in the basin near the door, watching the water swirl with bits of clay, disappearing down the drain like a whispered thought. Dinner was a quiet affair. Roasted lentils with garlic, baked root vegetables, and flatbread warmed over the coals. They sat close that evening, their voices softer than usual, their words slower. It felt like the villa itself was in a lullaby. After the meal, they moved to the hearth room, bringing blankets and cushions. Gaius began telling an old family story, not a grand tale, but a memory from his youth, about a day spent chasing fireflies through a vineyard near Capua. Lucius listened, head resting against the stone wall, letting the rhythm of Gaius's voice draw him deeper into calm. The words weren't important, it was the way they were spoken, slow, measured, filled with care. By the time the fire had dimmed and the last lamp had been extinguished, they each returned to their rooms in silence, not because they were tired, but because the day had said all it needed. Lucius slipped beneath his blanket, feeling the familiar weight of the air around him. The fig he had saved from the orchard rested on the table near his bed. He would eat it in the morning. For now, it was enough just to know it was there. Outside, the trees rustled faintly, the sky darkened fully. Sleep came, slow, kind, and deep, as it always did in this place. The villa greeted the new day in muted tones of blue and gray, the sky still holding remnants of dawn's hush. Lucius woke to the distant call of a lark rather than any human voice, and he lay for a moment, letting the quiet of early morning flow through him like gentle water. The clay lamp by his bedside had burned down to a small pool of oil and wick. its last glow fading into memory. He dressed slowly, slipping into his tunic and sandals, and made his way to the courtyard where Elia already stood by the fountain, soaking a cloth in cool water and wiping the stone rim. The air was fresh, carrying the scent of damp earth and new blossoms, promising another calm day. "Good morning," she murmured, offering him the cloth. "Good morning," he replied, taking it gratefully and wiping his forehead. He lingered by the fountain, watching ripples form and disappear as a single drop landed softly on the water's surface. Soon, Gaius and Cassianus joined them. Gaius carried a small wooden box containing seeds and bulbs, while Cassianus held a wax tablet inscribed with new verses of poetry, lines about the dawn, the olive trees, and the slow turning of seasons. They gathered on the lower terrace, near the herb garden, and spent the morning planting spring bulbs among the thyme and rosemary. Each bulb was placed with care, a tiny promise of color and life in weeks to come. Lucius pressed the soil gently over each one, whispering, "Grow." Well, as he covered them, the others worked at their own pace, not speaking much, but sharing the quiet companionship of hands in the earth. Midday arrived softly. They washed their hands in the basin and returned to the kitchen for a light meal of barley gruel, pomegranate seeds, and goat cheese. A single oil lamp was lit on the table, its flame steady amid the bright daylight. They ate in companionable silence, cheeks flushed from the morning's labor. Afterwards, Lucius retreated to his workshop, where he began shaping fresh clay for a final piece. A small incense burner shaped like a conch shell, his hands moved with practiced ease, forming the spirals as smoothly as water running over stone. Each curve felt correct, as though guided by memory rather than thought. Outside, Cassianus read a few lines of his new poem beneath the arbor, his voice low and rhythmic. Elia trimmed the last of the drying herbs, bundling them for tomorrow's sorting. Gaius took the wooden box to the storeroom, where he carefully labeled each bulb and seed before storing them in clay jars for safekeeping. In the late afternoon, they gathered again in the peristyle garden. The light had softened to a golden hue, and the air was filled with the gentle hum of bees returning to their hives. They drank watered wine from clay cups and shared the final figs from the orchard. Their flesh warm and sweet, Lucius presented his conch shell incense burner, still damp with the last traces of clay. He placed a small piece of resin inside and set it alight, the smoke curling from the top in pale spirals. The fragrance of frankincense and myrrh filled the air, weaving through the lavender and rosemary nearby. They watched the smoke rise, each lost in their own thoughts. None spoke. The moment was complete in its stillness, as if time had paused to breathe alongside them. As dusk began to fall, Gaius bid Cassianus farewell. The poet would continue his travels at dawn, carrying with him the verses born of the villa's calm. He embraced each family member, leaving behind a final gift, a folded scroll of his latest lines, meant to remind them of their gentle days here. When Cassianus departed, the villa felt both emptier and more full. His presence had been quiet, but profound, like the soft echo of a song in a silent hall. Dinner was a simple affair: lentil soup, fresh bread, and soft cheese with honey. They ate beneath the stars, with the conch shell incense burner casting silver smoke and the oil lamp glowing steadily beside. Then, after the meal, they retreated to their rooms one by one. Lucius placed the conch shell burner on his windowsill, letting the last tendrils of smoke drift skyward. He lay in bed, listening to the quiet night, surrounded by the gentle memories of the day. Beyond the walls, the Roman world continued its vast, ceaseless motion. But here, in this small corner of olive trees and stone, the empire breathed in a softer key, one of patience, presence, and peace. The final night in the villa arrived with a softness that felt almost sacred. There was no announcement, no shift in tone, no sudden change in mood, only the quiet deepening of shadows, the slower pace of footsteps, and the hush that filled the spaces between each gentle breath. Lucius stood for a while in the peristyle, hands folded behind his back, looking up at the darkening sky. The stars began to emerge, one by one, their light steady and unblinking. The moon hung low, full and glowing, casting silver across the tiled floor and highlighting the edges of the fig leaves swaying overhead. The villa around him was quiet but alive, not with noise, but with presence. The walls held the warmth of the day. The stones beneath his feet still retained the sun's memory. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called out once, then fell silent again. Inside, Elia prepared a final cup of chamomile and fennel tea. She offered one to Lucius without words, and they stood in the corridor drinking slowly. Leaning against the smooth plaster wall, the steam from the cup curled upward, disappearing into the air like dreams dissolving at dawn. Gaius joined them. Moments later, draping a soft wool shawl around Elia's shoulders. He smiled at Lucius and lifted his own cup. No toasts, no ceremony, just shared stillness. They all gathered once more in the atrium, where a single oil lamp flickered on. The table. Elia had placed dried lavender and crushed bay leaves around its base. The smell drifted through the open room, mingling with the fading scent of the evening meal. Lucius reached for the scroll Cassianus had left behind and opened it gently. The final verses were short, no grand farewell, just a soft reflection, in stone and shadow. In leaf and flame, the quiet days remember you long after you are gone. They sat in silence, letting the words settle like dust upon still air. Nothing more needed to be said. Later that evening, Lucius returned to his room for the last time. He looked around at the simple space that had been his home through these quiet days. The clay incense burner still rested on the windowsill, its edges now dry and firm. He would take it with him when he left, along with a satchel of dried herbs, one of Cassianus's sketches, and a folded piece of cloth Elia had sewn with his initials. He lay on his bed with the window open to the night sky. The cool air brushed against his skin like a lullaby. Every sound outside was gentle. The sigh of wind through trees, the distant chirp of night insects, the subtle creak of old wood relaxing into sleep. He closed his eyes, and in the quiet that followed, he felt no need to remember or plan, no need to reach for anything beyond the moment. The villa, the stars, the soft breath of the Roman night, it was all enough. Sleep came not like a falling weight, but like a whisper, a hush, a drifting leaf. And in that sleep, Lucius carried not thoughts, but feelings of peace, of time slowed down, of days lived gently. Of life, exactly as it should be, as you drift deeper into your own rest. Remember this: if you've enjoyed this quiet journey through time, consider supporting us by subscribing, liking, or sharing this story with someone who needs rest tonight. Your kind support helps keep these calm worlds alive, and your presence here means more than you know. Until the next soft story, may your dreams be gentle, your thoughts quiet, and your heart at peace. Good night.